So I invited Nikos from ARI Europe to discuss a little bit about the topic that we had today. Hi, Nikos.
Hi again. Nice to be here again.
So we take the opportunity that we have 15 minutes to discuss about human rights and individual rights. So when somebody is presented the idea of the rights, maybe there is a little bit confusion about human rights and individual rights. So let's bring clarity to this. Are they different, and if they are different, in which way?
So, in principle, I wouldn't say they're necessarily different. So, some people call it human rights, other people call it individual rights. So, for example, you can find talks by Ayn Rand from earlier decades that she talks about that she uses the term human rights. The thing is, the way it has been used in the last decades, usually human rights has had such an extent meaning that makes it almost meaningless. And not only that, if human rights has the extent that most people, when they talk about the rights, for example, the right to have a good house, or the right to an education, or the right of particular groups, the question then is, are these rights compatible with the idea of individual rights? So, to put very, very simply, there is one right, and out of this right, you have the other rights coming as a logical, let's say, a logical continuation. So you have the right to life. So this is the very fundamental, the first thing that we start with. And this means, for example, that if I have a right to my life as a living being, then I need to see how do I live. So as mentioned, the rights are a moral category, as we saw what Ayn Rand said, right? But also it's a recognition in a social context that to live as human beings, we need some particular things. So the first thing that I need, for example, is generally how I survive. I don't survive automatically. So if I sit down, even if no one does anything to me, I will not survive. I need to do some things to survive. And this is what makes us special as human beings. So, for example, I need to figure out somehow something to eat. I need to figure out to find something and figure out, is this good or poisonous, or is this the tiger going to attack me, or shall I attack it first, right? So I need to take all these decisions for how I'm going to survive and I'm going to flourish. Now, this is what is needed for me to do in order to survive. Now, when you put other people in the equation, so for example, this would apply even in a desert island, so to speak. I'd still have to have a moral code, so to speak, and that's the difference at least in Rand's theory to some other theories, that morality is not about how you treat others. It's mostly about how you live your life in order to survive and live a good life as a human being. That's why we would say it's like the guidelines book. Now, when you add other people in the equation, you have mainly one requirement, that they let you be, that they don't use force in terms of stopping you for pursuing your values. So you might want to be, let's say, an actress, someone else might be a doctor, a hunter, whatever. So irrespective of what social context you are, you have this expectation, the expectation that other people do not basically go out of your way. You can deal with them if you like, and your life is going to be much better if you cooperate on a professional level, or if you find people with whom you form friendships, romantic relationships. All that's great, but this is based on your will. So that's how we have, for example, from the right to life, we have the right to think for yourself and the right to communicate your thoughts. So, for example, the right to free speech. So the right to free speech, the way we discussed it, which is no one should force me by the use of force to say things that I don't want, or to stop me from saying things that I want to say in my property, then we can understand that the right, for example, to free speech comes naturally out of the right to life. Or if I need to work to survive, because we don't live in a world where I open my mouth and food comes in, right? I need to work. Therefore, again, this means that I need to keep the products of my labor. So again, the right to property as a a logical continuation of the right to life. So without the right to property, if, let's say, I create stuff and someone comes and pick it up and takes it away, I cannot survive. So again, the right to property, no contradiction here with my basic rights. Now let's add the right to an education, for example. What does it mean I have a right to an education? It should mean that I should be free to pursue my education, sure. But what about the idea that someone needs to provide this right to you? What about the idea that I have a right, basically, to your labor? So there's two ways to understand this, the right way and the wrong way. The right to education should mean I have the right, for example, to hire Mirela, who is a good teacher, and we have a transaction with money, or because I'm a good person, you say, okay, that's a charity or for free or whatever. This is, we have an uncoerced voluntary agreement, you're going to provide me education. But when the idea is that someone needs to provide me this education, whether they want or not, or someone needs to pay for this education, whether they want or not, then this is not anymore within the field of individual rights. Because what you have is, for your supposed right to be satisfied, someone else needs to either pay it when they don't want to pay it, or even more direct, you put a gun in someone's head that says, go and become Nikos' teacher. So we understand the first one as immoral. We never imagine that someone should become my teacher irrespective of whether they want it or not. And yet the people who say, oh, education is a right, don't understand that forcing a third person to pay the teacher to teach me is a mockery of rights. It's a contradiction of rights. This is why, I will use an extreme example, right? Think about it this way. It's the equivalent of saying, I have a right to love, which is, if I want to form a relationship with a woman or a man, obviously, if they are in a situation to consent, age of consent, all that stuff, then I should be free. That's obviously a right. But if I say, I have a right to love, therefore, even if no one wants me, someone should find me someone to love me, we would understand that this makes very little sense, that this is actually a contradiction of the idea of rights. That's why I'm suspicious when I hear the term human rights the way it is used today, because usually it involves the violation of the rights of someone else.
Yeah, right. I have another question for you, because usually the people that are watching us, maybe they are not so related with the individual rights and do not have so many information about this. So for them, the things are simple. If we did this event today, so the first conclusion I would have take from this event is to find out and to be precise about which are exactly the fundamental rights. Everybody talks about the individual rights and free of speech and so on. Okay, let's start with at least few examples of the individual rights. So the first and the end of itself is the right of life. So everybody has to understand that this is a fundamental individual right, correct?
Yes.
So from the right of life come another kind of rights, the right that you said before, the right for the property, because I have to work, I have to sustain my life, and that's why I have to keep my products. So I need the right for property. Also, we have the right for movement, right? Yaron Brook said in his book Equally is Unfair, that we have the right, the people should have the right to move in order to sustain their life, to go to some other places where they can work better or get more products and be profitable and sustain and develop their rights. What other rights can we make? A short list, not to go into so many details, but
the list could go on, but I think the main is, after the right of life, the right for freedom of thought and freedom of speech, because that's the very next step. Again, think about it this way. Think about a human being that finds itself in the world and needs to do some things in order to survive and flourish in this world. And then add more people in the equation, and then you see what is the situation that this person needs to operate in, so as that person's rights not to be offended. Let me give an example. We talked about free speech, right? Think about the difference between, and again, this is something that many liberals unfortunately don't get. They say, for example, that the book Mein Kampf or Holocaust denial, or other people say portrayals of the prophet, or other people say the wrong use of pronouns, or other people say social justice, education, or whatever. Everyone finds something that say, oh, that really offends me, therefore it should be legal or whatever. Now, compare this to someone who is stopping you on the road, and because you said something, they give you a punch. Now, what is the main difference there? I can go on with my life if I see something that offends me. I can go on in my life if I see someone who says Greeks with beard are stupid, right? I mean, tough luck. My feelings might be hurt, but my existential necessities, so to speak, are not in any way hurt, are not in any way influenced. Compare this with someone who stops you and gives you a punch. This is what we discussed earlier, and we said that the use of force is the one thing that actually violates your rights. And this could be the direct use of force, the punch, but also the indirect use of force. So, for example, try not paying your taxes, and when they knock on your door, say, no, sorry, go out, I'm not going to pay, and see what happens. Somewhere down the road is the threat of violence and the threat of force. So this is where I would start. So the right to life, and then the rights that are derivative to that follow organically, so to speak, from that. Again, the right to think, the right to free speech, and the right to property. And as we said in the social media and free speech, the right to property is crucial because it's where other rights are based. You mentioned, for example, the freedom to travel, right? Now, think how easier the immigration system would be if we made a deal. I say, okay, I'm going to fly to Romania. Mirela is going to employ me, or she's going to, guarantee that person's going to stay at my place or whatever. So if you see it as a deal between two individuals who own their property, or where the property rights of you having a business and being able to deal with whoever you want are respected, this makes things simpler. The moment you include elements such as the public roads, or think about it with free speech. Who is right and who is wrong if someone says, I don't want that person to speak in my university? If it's a public if it's the Anwan Center Romania, that's very simple. You own the place, you decide that person is in, that person is out. In a public university, how do you decide? Is it through majority? Is it through the power of who shouts louder? So that's why I said that without property rights, all the other rights become kind of an abstraction, which is very difficult to figure out how they can operate. Again, imagine a country where you cannot own printing presses, typewriters, a computer. How would the right to free speech look like there? So that's why I'm in favor of this very specific, and some people would call very narrow, or other people would call negative rights understanding of individual rights. And that's why not only I'm not in favor of this vague notion of human rights the way it's used today, I think it's destructive to what actual rights is. Basically, you can't have both. Today we had very many economists in the conference. One famous economist said, if you have a good currency and a bad currency, soon the bad currency is going to overtake the good currency. Something like that happens with the idea of rights. If you confuse in your mind what a right is, you will find rights that are actually not rights, such as, for example, the idea that you have a right to decent housing. Again, who's going to provide this? Have you asked them? Are they happy to provide it? If yes, good. If not, that's not a right. So these rights then end up making a mockery and completely undermining the crucial individual rights, which are the rights that we have because of the requirements of our life as human beings.
Yeah, right. I have another question for you because we have less than 7 minutes till we go live with Yaron. And
just to say to people who just tuned in that we had the technical problem with Deirdre McCluskey, so we are, how to call it? We are covering for Deirdre
improvising
and preparing the ground for Yaron.
Yeah, and because we share the same philosophy, it is easier for us to have a very pleasant discussion. I have also a short question about the rights. It's a little bit microphony. I don't know. I think on your side or my side.
I can hear you well, though. By the way, Yaron is also somewhere in the background. I saw him in the chat.
Yeah. About Scott said this afternoon in the second panel about the duty. So I want to discuss with you a little bit because you know I know what you're gonna say, but I want people to hear from you. What is different between the right and the duty? Should we have the duty? For instance, do we have the duty as adults to teach teenagers about the human rights?
Well, first of all, there's this idea that with rights comes responsibilities, which I don't like because it reminds me, you know, your parents, they give you a gift and they say, now I give you this basketball, for example, but you're going to have to study 3 hours more. This shows a big misunderstanding of what rights are. We don't get rights from God or from the government, and they're not a gift from anyone. No one is doing us a favor when they give us rights. The notion of rights is a recognition of what we need as human beings to live a good life, to live a flourishing life, to live life as humans. So in terms of what you need to do towards other people, this is obviously you have, quote, duty or however you want to call it, not to use force against them because then you violate your rights. But then how you treat other people has to do with what are your values. So for example, with your lover or someone you love or your friends, obviously you're going to spend more time with them. But this is something that you decide. It's not a duty. By calling these things duties, I think we completely miss what is the actual context of this relationship. So yes, you do have, let's say, a duty not to use force against others and not to breach their rights. But it's not a responsibility that, let's say, comes hand in hand with your rights. Like, oh, we gave you the rights, now you have this responsibility. And see how very easily this can become, you can go down a rabbit hole of bad arguments. For example, when I got conscripted to the Greek army, what's the usual argument? The argument is, this country has given you so much, now you have the duty to go for 9 months, and basically we're going to kidnap you for 9 months because you need to serve the country, right? So when you introduce this idea of duty, it's this deal that says, oh, we gave you this, now you have to do that. And of course, we're going to violate your rights, but you know, what the hell, you have a duty. So that's why I don't want to use this term. And there are some things that you cannot do to other people, but I think the term duty also, it has this religious, sometimes this religious kind of baggage. So I don't really like the way it's used, and that's why that's an issue also I have with Jordan Peterson, how liberally he uses this term duty. You know, we have to understand that it's not something that goes. It's not like the other side of the coin of the coin of rights. Anyway, let's clear the floor for Yaron, because
Barbara is also on a broadcasting room, so we have 2 more minutes. Let's give them a little bit of space so they can start the...
Yeah, Yaron, Mirela is gonna be with you in a second, and she's gonna guide you to the center of the stage. Anyway, from me, thank you. I'll see you all soon in a bit.